Imagine being told you can't live somewhere, not because of money or credit, but because of who you are. That's what happened to Vanessa Coleman, and her response changed everything. You don't forget the moment someone tells you that you don't belong. It came in the form of a short letter tucked into a plain white envelope. No raised voice, no direct insult, just a few cold lines that carried enough weight to crush months of anticipation. The letter was from the Homeowners Association of Willow Bend Estates in Plano, Texas. Vanessa had been eyeing one particular home on Ashcroft Drive for months, a 2-story brick property with a wraparound porch and an oak tree stretching tall in the front yard. She'd toured it twice, measured the living room walls for the art she wanted to hang, and even pictured Sunday dinners spilling out onto the patio with her nieces and nephews laughing in the background. She had the money. She had the credit. She had the stability that most buyers only dreamed of. So when the rejection came, it didn't make sense. Not at first. The letter read, "After reviewing your application, the association has determined that your purchase request does not align with the long-term community fit we are striving to maintain. We appreciate your interest in Willow Bend Estates community fit." Those 2 words burned. Vanessa sat at her dining table, the letter crumpled in her fist, staring at the framed photographs on her wall. Her parents, who had worked themselves to the bone to give her a life they never had. Her college graduation, where she was the first in her family to walk across the stage. Her company's award ceremony, where she had been named Marketing Executive of the Year. Every one of those moments proved she belonged wherever she chose to be. And yet here she was, rejected for something she couldn't quite put her finger on. But she knew exactly what it meant. That evening, she called her younger brother, Anthony Coleman, who lived in Dallas. His voice crackled through the speaker. "Wait, hold on," Anthony said. "They actually wrote that? Community fit? That's what it says. That's just code, Vanessa. They're not even trying to hide it." She sighed, rubbing her temple. "I don't get it. I've worked for this. I planned for this. Why does it feel like the goalpost keeps moving?" Anthony's tone softened. "Because it does. But maybe this isn't the end of the story. Maybe it's the start of a different one." Vanessa didn't respond right away. She stared out her window, watching the streetlights flicker on, one by one. She had always been taught to fight for what she wanted. But how do you fight a system that hides behind polite words and legal jargon? The next morning, she drove back to Willow Bend Estates. She parked across from the house she wanted and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel. Kids rode their bikes in lazy circles. Sprinklers ticked across manicured lawns. A woman with blonde hair clipped in a neat bun jogged by, her eyes glancing at Vanessa's car for a second too long before flicking away. Vanessa whispered to herself, "I don't think they ever wanted me here." Later that week, she tried to schedule a meeting with the HOA board. She thought maybe there was a misunderstanding, some sort of clerical error. But the reply from the HOA president, Richard Hanley, was curt. "The decision has been made." There is no room for further discussion. Her stomach tightened. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about being told no, about being told she didn't measure up to some invisible standard no one would dare define. That night, over dinner with her longtime friend Dana Ricks, Vanessa let the anger pour out. "I could have written a check on the spot. I had everything lined up, and they still said no." Dana leaned back, crossing her arms. "They're playing a game you weren't meant to win." "Then I'll change the rules." Dana arched an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Vanessa's fork hovered over her plate. "I don't know yet, but I'm not walking away. Not this time." The words hung in the air like a promise. For the first time since the rejection, Vanessa felt the sting of defeat fade, replaced with something sharper, something heavier. Resolve. But the real story wasn't in the rejection. It was in what Vanessa decided to do next, and that decision would shake the very neighborhood that had tried to keep her out. The rejection letter didn't just ruin a house purchase, it rattled something inside Vanessa Coleman that she thought was unshakable. For years, she had carried herself with confidence, knowing her resume, her salary, and her savings gave her a safety net most people only hoped for. Yet one thin sheet of paper had made her feel invisible. She sat in her kitchen, staring at her laptop, scrolling through listings she didn't want. None of them compared to that house on Ashcroft Drive. The others were fine, sure. Spacious kitchens, big yards, updated bathrooms. But they weren't hers. Not the one she had dreamed about. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother, Darlene Coleman, calling from San Antonio. "Baby, Anthony told me what happened." Her mother's voice came gently. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Vanessa lied. "You don't sound fine. I just don't get it, Mama. I did everything right. I worked hard. I saved. I followed the rules. And still, they shut the door in my face." There was a pause. Darlene's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen this kind of roadblock before. "They've been shutting doors a long time, Vanessa. But every door they closed on me, I found another way in." "You will too." Vanessa's throat tightened. Her mother's words gave comfort, but they also made her ache. She wasn't supposed to still be fighting the same battles her mother had faced decades earlier. The following week, Vanessa forced herself to go back to work in downtown Dallas. At the office, her co-workers congratulated her on her recent project launch, but she barely heard them. Her mind kept circling back to the HOA's rejection. At lunch, she confided in her colleague Marcus Dunn, a soft-spoken financial analyst she trusted. "They didn't even give me a real reason," Vanessa said, poking at her salad. "Just community fit. That's not even measurable." Marcus frowned. "That's deliberate. They word it like that so you can't pin them down. If you challenged it, they'd argue it's subjective. That's exactly what makes it impossible to fight. Unless you find another way." That sentence lingered in Vanessa's thoughts. Another way. The sting of rejection was turning into something else. Something heavier. Nights were the worst. She'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, picturing the families living in Willow Bend estates, laughing around fire pits, decorating their porches for the holidays, watching fireworks on the 4th of July. They got to belong. And she didn't. One evening, she met Anthony at a cafe in Frisco. He was waiting with 2 coffees, his expression somewhere between protective and frustrated. "Vanessa, I hate seeing you like this. I know what it feels like. But you can't let them win." She let out a bitter laugh. "Feels like they already did. Not if you flip it on them. Think about it. They don't want you in there. Fine. But what if you bought the place next to it? Or another one down the street? They can't stop you from buying outright if it's on the open market." Vanessa blinked. "What are you saying?" Anthony leaned forward. "I'm saying they don't own you. And they don't own the neighborhood. You could play this game smarter than they ever imagined." At first, she dismissed the idea. Buying one house was stressful enough. How could she possibly think about multiple? But the seed had been planted, and it refused to die. Later that night, she journaled her thoughts, scribbling until her hand cramped. She wrote about fairness, about her parents' sacrifices, about how she had worked every late night and fought for every promotion. She deserved the life she wanted, and she wasn't going to ask permission anymore. The next day, she called Dana. "Remember what I said about changing the rules?" "Yeah," Dana replied. "You sounded like a woman with a plan." Vanessa hesitated, then spoke carefully. "What if instead of fighting for one house, I bought 3? What if I didn't just live there? What if I owned part of the neighborhood?" There was silence on the other end before Dana broke into laughter. "You're serious?" "I am." "Vanessa, that's bold. That's risky. That's the only way they'll ever understand I belong." That was the first time Vanessa admitted out loud what she had been circling around for days. She didn't just want in. She wanted control. The idea scared her, but it also electrified her. Her dream of living in that community hadn't disappeared. It had transformed. But deciding to fight back was only the beginning. Figuring out how to pull it off would test her patience, her network, and even her belief in herself. Before she could move forward with this audacious plan, Vanessa found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. If she was going to risk so much, she needed to remind herself why she had fought so hard for stability in the first place. Growing up in San Antonio, Vanessa had watched her parents juggle long shifts to keep food on the table. Her father, Charles Coleman, worked as a city bus driver, often waking before sunrise. Her mother, Darlene, took on 2 jobs, mornings at a dry cleaner and evenings cleaning offices downtown. They never complained in front of the kids, but Vanessa remembered overhearing their quiet conversations late at night, voices heavy with exhaustion. It was during one of those nights, hiding at the top of the stairs, that Vanessa had made a silent vow. I'll make life easier for them one day. Her childhood home wasn't fancy. It was a modest 1-story with peeling paint and a yard her father struggled to keep green. Still, her parents took pride in it. They believed in ownership, even if it was small, even if it wasn't perfect. It was theirs. That mindset carried Vanessa through college at the University of Texas at Austin, where she majored in marketing. She hustled for scholarships, worked part-time jobs, and graduated with honors. Her parents had cried at the ceremony, Charles squeezing her hand as he whispered, "You did it, for all of us." In the years that followed, Vanessa built a career brick by brick. She climbed from assistant to director, eventually securing her role as a marketing executive at a Dallas firm. The long hours, the presentations, the travel, she had endured it all with one vision in mind: financial security and a home that reflected the life her parents had sacrificed for. That's why the rejection stung so deeply. It wasn't just about vanity or status. It was about honoring the promise she had made as a girl. One Friday night, after a particularly draining week at work, Vanessa sat down with Anthony in his apartment. The 2 siblings often relied on these conversations to ground each other. "You know why this is eating at me?" she said, leaning back on his couch. "Why?" "Because it's not just about me. It's about Mom and Dad. About everything they poured into me. I wanted them to see me walk into that neighborhood with my head high. I wanted them to see it was worth it." Anthony nodded slowly. "I get that. But think about this. Maybe the fact they blocked you is the push you needed. What if your story isn't about squeezing into their rules, but about rewriting them?" Vanessa let out a dry laugh. "You make it sound easy." "Not easy, but possible." That word, possible, echoed in her mind for days. Vanessa also thought about the younger women in her firm, especially the interns she mentored. Many of them looked at her as proof that success was within reach. She couldn't shake the feeling that if she backed down now, she'd be letting them down too. The thought struck her while she was driving home late one night, city lights flickering across her windshield. Maybe this fight wasn't just hers. Maybe it was bigger. The following weekend, she visited her parents in San Antonio. She hadn't planned to bring up the rejection, but it spilled out over dinner. "They said I wasn't a fit," Vanessa admitted, pushing her food around her plate. Her father put down his fork. "A fit for who?" "For what?" "I don't know, but it doesn't matter anymore. I've been thinking, maybe I don't just need to buy a house there. Maybe I need to own more of it." Her parents exchanged a look, a mix of worry and pride. Darlene finally spoke. "That sounds like a mountain, Vanessa." "Then I'll climb it." Her father leaned back, studying her carefully. "You always did aim higher than the rest of us. Just make sure you've got your footing before you start climbing." That night, Vanessa lay awake in her old bedroom, staring at the ceiling she once decorated with posters and glow-in-the-dark stars. She thought about the girl who had promised to give her parents a better life. That girl hadn't dreamed small. Neither should she. By Sunday evening, as she hugged her parents goodbye, Vanessa's mind was made up. The rejection had carved a wound, but it also lit a fire. She wasn't going to let a board of strangers dictate her worth. Driving back to Dallas, she gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. The road stretched ahead, and for the first time since the rejection, she felt like she had direction again. But turning a bold idea into reality would require more than passion. Vanessa needed strategy, allies, and the courage to face resistance she had never imagined. The morning after her drive back from San Antonio, Vanessa woke up with a new kind of restlessness. It wasn't the helpless frustration that had haunted her since the rejection. This time, it was sharper, more focused. She knew what she wanted to do, but she had no idea how to begin. Her first call was to Dana. If anyone would keep her grounded while still feeding her fire, it was her. When Dana picked up, she was already sipping coffee. "You sound awake early," Dana teased. "I didn't sleep much. I've been thinking about." Buying more than one property in Willow Bend. There was silence on the line. Then Dana let out a low whistle. You're serious? Dead serious. They think I don't belong there. Fine. I'll own enough that they can't ignore me. Vanessa, that's huge. That's not just buying a house. That's changing the entire playing field. I know. That's the point, Dana laughed softly, though her tone carried caution. Okay. Then what's the plan? That question landed heavy. Vanessa didn't have a plan yet, only the determination. But as she spoke the idea aloud, her brain started filling in the blanks. Over the next few days, she reached out to contacts she trusted. One of them was Harold Kim, a real estate broker she had worked with in the past. They met at a cafe near Legacy West, laptops open, papers spread across the table. Harold raised an eyebrow as she explained. You want to buy multiple homes in the same neighborhood. That's ambitious. I don't want to buy just one home anymore. I want influence. Influence? Vanessa leaned forward. If I can purchase strategically, I'll have voting power within the HOA. They can't exclude me if I'm at the table making decisions. Harold tapped his pen against his notebook. That would take serious capital. Homes in Willow Bend aren't cheap. I know. That's why I'll need partners. The word felt risky coming out of her mouth. She had always prided herself on independence, on not needing anyone else to reach her goals. But this was bigger than her. That evening, she called Anthony again. I've been thinking, she began. That always means trouble, he teased. I'm going to need investors. Not a lot, but enough to help me get started. I'll handle the management. They'll just provide backing. Anthony paused. You're not scared? Of course I'm scared. But what scares me more is letting them win. Anthony didn't answer immediately, but she could hear the pride in his voice when he finally spoke. Then I'm in. Whatever you need, I'll help. Momentum began to build. Within 2 weeks, Harold had identified 2 properties in Willow Bend that were going on the market. One owned by a retired couple relocating to Florida, and another being sold after a divorce. Both were priced below market value because the sellers wanted quick closings. Vanessa met Harold at the first property, a beige stucco house with a wide front yard. As they walked through the empty rooms, she felt a thrill pulse through her. She wasn't just looking at walls and windows, she was looking at a foothold. Can you imagine? She whispered, running her hand along the kitchen counter. Imagine what? Harold asked. Me? Owning this? Them having to send me the HOA mail? She smiled for the first time in weeks. That night, she met Dana and Anthony at her apartment. Papers littered her dining table, contracts and financial projections stacked high. Dana studied the spreadsheets. This is real, Dana said. You're really doing this? Yes. And once you buy, then what? Then I buy again, one step at a time. Every property is leverage. They talked late into the night, sketching out possibilities, risks, and contingencies. At one point, Anthony leaned back and shook his head. You know what you're about to do, right? Vanessa raised an eyebrow. You're about to take over an entire neighborhood. The words made them all laugh, but the laughter carried weight, because it wasn't just a joke. It was the truth. The next morning, Vanessa wired the earnest money for her first offer. As she clicked submit, a shiver ran through her. Half fear, half excitement. The rejection that had once humiliated her was now the fuel pushing her into uncharted territory. She whispered to herself, they said I didn't fit. Let's see how they feel when I own the place. But buying the homes was only the first hurdle. Winning the neighborhood's respect and forcing the HOA to face her would prove far more complicated. The first offer went through faster than Vanessa expected. Within a month, the beige stucco house on Willow Bend's west side belonged to her. Signing those papers didn't just feel like closing on a property, it felt like reclaiming dignity. But as thrilling as it was, she knew one house wouldn't give her the leverage she wanted. She needed more. Harold, ever the realist, reminded her over lunch at a sandwich shop in Plano. One property doesn't give you voting power on the board, he said, stirring his iced tea. I know, Vanessa replied, but it's a start. You'll need at least 3, maybe 4 to have influence. That's assuming you get allies among the current residents. Vanessa smirked. Allies will come later. For now, I'm focusing on ownership." Her determination caught Harold's attention. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Then you're going to have to move quickly. Homes here don't stay on the market long." "Find me the next one," she said firmly. Over the following weeks, Vanessa's evenings were consumed by walkthroughs, negotiations, and paperwork. One property, a brick colonial owned by a couple divorcing, became her second purchase. Another, a smaller ranch-style house, came after she negotiated directly with a seller tired of dealing with the HOA's strict rules. Each closing chipped away at the barrier that had once excluded her. Anthony, who had pledged to help from the start, became her unofficial partner. He was the one who reassured her during late-night calls when the stress threatened to overwhelm her. "You're not crazy," he told her one night. "I feel crazy," she admitted. "What kind of person decides to buy multiple homes just because a board said no?" Anthony chuckled. "The kind of person who refuses to be told where she does or doesn't belong. That's not crazy. That's power." Donna, meanwhile, handled the role of skeptic. Over coffee, she raised the questions Vanessa tried not to think about. What if you run out of money? What if the HOA blocks you in ways you can't see yet? Vanessa sighed. "I've thought about that. And I'm prepared to risk it. I'd rather go down swinging than walk away quietly." Her voice shook slightly when she said it, but Dana saw the conviction in her eyes. By the time Vanessa owned her third property, neighbors had started noticing. Some greeted her politely when she pulled into driveways, but others stared too long or whispered across lawns. It wasn't lost on her. She could feel the weight of their curiosity and their judgment. One Saturday afternoon, while Vanessa stood in the driveway of her newest house supervising repairs, an older neighbor approached. His name was Edward Lawrence, a retired engineer whose gray hair was trimmed neatly above his collar. "You're the one buying up these homes," he said, his tone neutral but sharp. "Yes," Vanessa replied, meeting his gaze. "You plan on flipping them?" "No, I plan on staying." Edward studied her for a long moment. "We take pride in this community. It's particular, I've noticed," Vanessa said dryly. His lips tightened. "Some people might say you're trying to change too much too fast." She tilted her head. "Maybe change is overdue." Edward didn't reply. He just gave a tight nod and walked away. But Vanessa felt the weight of the exchange linger. Later that week, she received her first HOA notice in the mail. A warning that her tenants in one property had left trash cans out past the pickup deadline. It wasn't a major violation, but the wording was hostile, filled with threats of fines. Vanessa suspected it wasn't really about trash cans. She called the number listed on the letter and asked for Richard Hanley, the HOA president. He answered with clipped politeness. "Ms. Coleman, I assume you're calling about the violation notice?" "Yes, I am. It's been addressed. But I'd like to talk about the tone of the letter." "The tone?" "Yes. It read less like a notice and more like a warning." Richard paused, then said flatly, "We take our rules seriously. That's why this community maintains its standards." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "I take standards seriously too, Mr. Hanley. Which is why you'll be seeing more of me." She ended the call before he could respond. By the end of that quarter, Vanessa owned 4 homes in Willow Bend Estates, 4 sets of keys, 4 properties with her name on the deed. It was enough to give her voting rights at the next HOA meeting, and enough to make Richard Hanley very aware that the woman he once dismissed wasn't going away. As she drove through the neighborhood one evening, passing her properties, Vanessa felt a strange calm settle over her. The rejection letter that had once cut her down was now just a piece of paper buried in a drawer. What mattered but property ownership was just the beginning. The real test would come when Vanessa stepped into the lion's den, the HOA meeting where the same people who tried to shut her out would have to face her directly. The HOA meeting was held in the community center off Willow Bend Parkway, a building that looked harmless enough from the outside, neutral beige walls, neatly trimmed hedges, a row of flagpoles out front. But as Vanessa pulled into the lot that Tuesday evening, her stomach tightened. This wasn't just another errand. It was the moment she would step into a room full of people who had tried to keep her out, and she would sit across from them with undeniable proof that she belonged. Anthony had offered to come with her, but Vanessa insisted she go alone. This was her battle. She wanted to face them without backup, to show she didn't need anyone to speak for her. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. A long table at the front of the room held 5 HOA board members, with Richard Hanley planted squarely in the middle, like a king at court. His posture was stiff, his suit pressed, his glasses perched just so on his nose. Vanessa walked in quietly, her heels clicking against the tile. Conversations dipped. A few heads turned. Whispers passed from one row to another. She kept her expression steady, scanning the room before choosing a seat near the front. Richard cleared his throat as the meeting came to order. Good evening, everyone. Let's get started. First on the agenda, maintenance budgets for the upcoming quarter. The discussions droned on. Landscaping contracts, pool hours, neighborhood watch updates. Vanessa listened, but her mind stayed locked on her turn. Finally, Richard shifted to the open floor portion. Before we adjourn, he said, are there any comments from residents? Vanessa stood. The scrape of her chair against the floor drew attention. She felt dozens of eyes land on her, some curious, others wary. My name is Vanessa Coleman, she began, her voice steady but firm. As of last month, I am the owner of 4 properties in Willow Bend Estates. I have voting rights in this HOA, and I intend to use them. A murmur rippled through the room. Richard blinked, adjusting his glasses. Yes, Ms. Coleman, we are aware of your recent purchases. Good, she replied, locking eyes with him. Then you're also aware that the letter I received denying me a home in this neighborhood cited something called community fit. I'd like that phrase explained. What exactly does it mean? The room fell silent. Richard's jaw tightened. That matter has been closed. The board determined— No, Vanessa cut in. You determined nothing. You used vague language to keep me out. Yet here I am, sitting in this room, legally owning more property than some of the people on this board. So I'll ask again. What does community fit mean? A woman at the end of the table, Margaret Lane, shifted uncomfortably. She glanced at Richard before speaking. The phrase is meant to preserve harmony in the neighborhood. To ensure new residents share the values we've built here, Vanessa tilted her head. Values? Or barriers? The tension snapped tighter. Some residents in the chairs behind her whispered louder now. A man in a baseball cap muttered, She's got a point. Richard leaned forward. Miss Coleman, if you have concerns, you can file them through the formal complaint process. Vanessa's lips curved into a thin smile. I'm not filing a complaint. I'm making a statement. I'm here. I own property here, and I will be at every meeting from now on. The silence stretched. Richard looked like he wanted to shut her down but couldn't find the words. For the first time, Vanessa saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Not confidence, but unease. When the meeting adjourned, a few residents approached her. Some avoided eye contact, but others were surprisingly supportive. One woman, Gloria Ramirez, touched Vanessa's arm gently. Good for you, Gloria said. It's about time someone asked those questions. They've been running things the same way for too long. Vanessa offered a small smile. Thank you. I plan on asking a lot more. Driving home that night, Vanessa replayed the meeting in her mind. She had walked into that room as the outsider they once rejected, but she had left as someone they had to reckon with. The power dynamic had shifted, even if just slightly. Still, she knew this was only the beginning. Ownership gave her leverage, but influence would require persistence. She'd have to show up, speak up, and prove that her presence wasn't temporary. But the more Vanessa asserted herself, the clearer it became that not everyone— Vanessa had expected resistance. What she didn't expect was how quickly it would escalate after her first HOA meeting. Within 2 weeks, small annoyances started piling up. Notices in her mailbox about minor violations, weeds that weren't there, porch lights that supposedly stayed on too long, tenants who parked a few inches over the line. Each letter carried the same stiff tone. Failure to comply would result in fines. At first, she brushed them off as coincidence, but after the 4th notice in 10 days, she called Anthony. They're trying to bury me in paperwork, she said, holding up the latest envelope. What's it about this time? Apparently, the grass in front of the Ashcroft property is a quarter-inch too high. They included a photograph, Anthony snorted. A quarter-inch? That's harassment. That's exactly what it is. Her suspicion was confirmed at the next HOA meeting. The agenda was filled with tedious discussions until Richard Hanley brought up an increase in violations reported across several homes. Though he didn't name her, the sideways glances from board members made it clear who he meant. Vanessa raised her hand. Since we're talking about violations, I'd like clarification. Are inspectors measuring grass with a ruler now? Because that's what my notice suggested. The room shifted with quiet chuckles, but Richard didn't laugh. We maintain high standards in Willow Bend. Consistency keeps the neighborhood desirable. Vanessa leaned forward. Consistency is fine. Singling out homeowners is not. If the board wants to talk about standards, then let's apply them evenly. For a moment, the room went silent. Then Margaret Lane spoke up softly. She's right. We've all let things slide from time to time. If we're going to enforce rules, they should be fair. Richard shot her a glare, but said nothing more. Vanessa could see cracks forming in his control. Outside after the meeting, a tall man in his 60s approached her. His name was Donald Price, a long-time resident with a reputation for speaking his mind. You gave him a run tonight, Donald said, shaking his head. I've lived here 20 years and I've never seen anyone challenge him like that. Does he always come down this hard on people? Vanessa asked. Donald smirked. Not on people he likes. The words stuck with her. Richard's enforcement wasn't about rules. It was about power. The pushback grew more personal in the weeks that followed. One morning, Vanessa found graffiti scrawled across the side of her garage. Go home. The paint was crude, the letters jagged. She stood there staring at it, her chest tightening, until a neighbor walking her dog slowed down. Terrible, the woman muttered. I'm sorry you had to see that. Do you know who did it? Vanessa asked. The woman hesitated, then shook her head. No, but it's not the first time someone's pulled something like this. Vanessa snapped a photo of the graffiti and called the police to file a report. She knew nothing would come of it, but documenting the hostility mattered. Later, when she told Dana about it over dinner, Dana's eyes flashed with anger. They want to scare you off, Dana said. Vanessa nodded. That's the goal, but it's not working. Still, the weight of the hostility pressed on her. Some nights she lay awake, wondering if she had pushed too far, if the cost of making a point was worth the toll. But then she'd think about her parents, her younger colleagues, the promise she made to herself as a girl, and the fear hardened back into resolve. The next HOA meeting brought everything to a head. Richard, clearly rattled by her growing presence, introduced a new proposal. A cap on the number of properties any single person could own in the neighborhood. He framed it as protecting diversity, but Vanessa knew exactly who the proposal targeted. She raised her hand calmly. So let me get this straight. You want to punish success. If someone invests in this community, spends money here, pays taxes here, you want to shut them down? Richard adjusted his glasses. It's about preventing monopolies. Vanessa's voice rose, sharp and clear. No, it's about preventing me. You never cared when other investors bought multiple homes, but the minute I do it, suddenly it's a problem. Why is that? The room buzzed with murmurs. Margaret looked down at her notes, clearly uncomfortable. Donald, seated in the audience, raised his voice. She's right. My neighbor owns 3 rental properties here, and nobody's ever said a word. This is targeted, plain and simple. The tension in the room was electric. For the first time, Richard looked like he was losing control of the narrative. Vanessa felt it too. A shift, subtle but undeniable. She wasn't the outsider anymore. She was a challenger, and she had allies forming around her. But Richard wasn't finished, and the harder Vanessa pushed, the more determined he became to fight back with every tool at his disposal. By the time spring rolled into Plano, Vanessa's presence in Willow Bend Estates could no longer be ignored. She wasn't just a name on deeds anymore. She was a voice, a vote, and a face that showed up at every HOA meeting. And little by little, things began to shift. The first change came unexpectedly. During one meeting, Margaret Lane raised a complaint about the cost of landscaping services. For years, the HOA had used the same contractor, a company with inflated prices and little accountability. Vanessa flipped through the financial reports, then raised her hand. "I work in marketing, not finance," she said. "But even I can see we're overpaying. Why haven't we looked for competitive bids?" The room went quiet. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Donald Price spoke up from the back. "She's right. We've been shelling out too much money for years. Why not get a few more quotes?" Heads nodded. By the end of the night, the board had agreed to request new bids. A small victory, but one that proved Vanessa's presence carried weight. Outside after the meeting, Gloria Ramirez approached her again. "You're shaking things up," Gloria said with a smile. "Not my intention?" Vanessa replied, though she couldn't help grinning. Gloria chuckled. "Change isn't always bad." Some of us have been waiting for it. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had once stared at her with suspicion now stopped her during walks, asking questions or offering support. A young couple with 2 children thanked her for speaking up about rising HOA fees. An older resident admitted he'd grown tired of Richard's heavy-handed tactics, but had never felt confident enough to challenge him. For the first time, Vanessa felt less like an outsider and more like a representative. But progress wasn't without tension. Some residents still made their disdain clear. One morning, she found a note taped to the door of one of her rental properties. "Stop trying to change our community." The handwriting was jagged, the ink smeared. She crumpled it up, tossed it into the trash, and carried on. Despite the hostility, the wins started stacking. After months of quiet lobbying, she successfully pushed for a review of HOA violation policies. Too many notices, she argued, were being weaponized instead of used fairly. The board, pressured by rising support from other residents, reluctantly agreed. At the next meeting, when Richard tried to push through another restrictive policy, Margaret spoke up, this time without hesitation. "I don't think this board should vote on something that hasn't been reviewed by the entire community," she said. Vanessa caught her eye, and Margaret gave the faintest nod. Later, Margaret approached her in the parking lot. "You were right," Margaret admitted. "About the violations, about a lot of things. I should have said something sooner." Vanessa smiled. It's never too late. It wasn't just meetings where Vanessa felt the change. Walking through the neighborhood, she noticed how conversations shifted. Instead of whispers, people greeted her. Children waved as she drove by. The same streets that once felt closed off now carried hints of openness. One Saturday, she hosted a small cookout in the backyard of one of her properties. It wasn't anything extravagant, just burgers, music, and folding chairs. But neighbors showed up. Gloria brought a tray of tamales. Donald arrived with a cooler of sodas. Families gathered, kids played tag across the grass, and for a few hours, the weight of hostility lifted. As the evening wound down, Dana pulled her aside. "Look around," Dana whispered. "This is your neighborhood now." Vanessa scanned the yard, the laughter, the conversations, the clinking of cups. For the first time since she opened that rejection letter, she felt something close to peace. But she knew it wasn't over. Richard still held the title of president, and he wasn't stepping down quietly. He watched every move she made, waiting for her to slip. The next board election was only months away. If Vanessa wanted lasting change, she couldn't stop here. She had to run for a position herself. That night, as she packed up leftover food from the cookout, she felt a renewed determination settle in her chest. The cookout wasn't just a social gathering. It was proof that people were ready for something different. But elections bring out the ugliest side of competition, and Vanessa was about to find out just how far Richard would go to keep his grip on power. The election notice arrived in every mailbox in Willow Bend Estates in late June, a crisp flyer announcing the upcoming HOA board vote scheduled for July. Vanessa stared at the paper when she pulled it from her mailbox, her thumb brushing over the bolded words. Board positions open. President, Treasurer, Member at Large. For a moment, she felt the old sting of that first rejection letter, the words community fit echoing in her memory. But this time, she didn't feel small. She felt ready. That evening, she called Anthony. "I'm running," she said, no hesitation in her voice. I knew you would, he replied. Which position? President. Anthony laughed, loud and proud. Go big or go home. I like it, Dana. Ever the skeptic, raised her eyebrow when Vanessa told her. President? That's not just influence, that's control. Exactly, Vanessa answered. If Richard wants to fight me, he's going to have to do it head-on. Word spread quickly. Some residents were surprised, others thrilled, a few openly hostile. Richard, of course, wasted no time campaigning against her. His flyers painted him as the guardian of tradition, the man who had protected community values for over a decade. At one meeting, he even warned of outsiders with hidden agendas trying to take over the neighborhood. Everyone knew who he meant. Vanessa refused to stoop to his level. Instead, she knocked on doors. She introduced herself to neighbors who hadn't spoken to her before. She asked questions about fees, about rules, about what people really wanted for their community. One afternoon, she sat with Gloria Ramirez on her porch. Richard keeps talking about values, Gloria said. But all I hear are excuses to shut people out. Vanessa nodded. That's why I'm running. Not to erase values, but to create new ones that actually welcome people instead of pushing them away. As the days ticked down to the election, Vanessa felt the pressure building. Flyers littered the sidewalks, whispers circulated at the pool, conversations turned sharper. Some neighbors avoided her completely, others offered quiet support, slipping notes of encouragement into her mailbox. The night of the election, the community center was packed. Folding chairs lined the room, every seat filled, residents standing in the back. The air buzzed with tension. Richard sat at the front, confident as ever, his suit perfectly pressed. Vanessa sat across from him, her shoulders straight, her heart pounding. The moderator called the meeting to order, then gave each candidate 3 minutes to speak. Richard went first, his words polished and familiar. I've served this community faithfully for over a decade, he declared. I've kept standards high, property values strong, and our neighborhood one of the most desirable in Plano. I ask for your continued trust. Polite applause followed. Then it was Vanessa's turn. She walked to the front, her palms damp, but her voice steady. My name is Vanessa Coleman. Many of you know me now, but some of you only know the rumors. I'm not here to tear this community apart. I'm here because I believe in it. I believe in fairness, in transparency, in making sure every resident feels like they belong. That means clear rules, reasonable fees, and a board that listens. I was told once that I didn't fit here, but I've proven I do. And so do you. All of you. That's the community I want to lead. The room erupted in applause louder than she expected. Richard shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. The ballots were passed out. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the votes were counted. Vanessa sat still, Anthony's words echoing in her head. Go big or go home. Finally, the moderator cleared his throat. For the position of HOA president, by a vote of 68 to 54, the winner is Ms. Vanessa Coleman. Gasps filled the room. Some clapped, others muttered under their breath. Vanessa sat frozen for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. She had done it. As she walked to the front to accept the position, she caught Richard's glare. His face was pale, his hands clenched, but he couldn't stop it. The days after the election felt different. For the first time since that rejection letter landed in her mailbox, Vanessa walked through Willow Bend Estates with her head high, not as an outsider, but as the elected president of the HOA. Neighbors waved, some warmly, others stiffly, but they waved. Even the silence from those who disapproved didn't sting anymore. She wasn't here to please everyone. She was here to lead. Her first meeting as president set the tone. Vanessa sat at the center of the long table, where Richard once presided, and looked out at a room full of expectant faces. She began simply. We're not here to control people. We're here to serve them. From now on, this board will operate with transparency, fairness, and accountability. There were murmurs, but they weren't hostile. People listened, and that alone was progress. One of her first actions was to review the violation policy. She proposed a fairer system with warnings before fines and equal enforcement across all properties. When Richard, now sitting in the audience, tried to argue, Vanessa didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed to the inconsistencies in past records. Numbers don't lie, and neither did her steady tone. Soon after, she arranged community events meant to bring people together rather than pit them against each other. A summer block party, open to every family. A fall neighborhood cleanup day where kids painted fences and parents shared food. Slowly, fences weren't just being mended physically but emotionally too. Dana attended the block party and whispered as she watched kids playing in the street. "You see this? You did this." Vanessa shook her head, smiling. "No, we did this." Everyone who chose connection over division. Even Margaret Lane, once a quiet enabler of Richard's leadership, stood at Vanessa's side during these events, pitching in, handing out flyers, and encouraging participation. Seeing someone like Margaret cross that bridge showed Vanessa just how powerful one act of persistence could be. But not everything was smooth. Richard continued to mutter from the sidelines, challenging her decisions, filing petty complaints. Yet the louder he tried to resist, the more isolated he became. His once iron grip on the board slipped away, not with dramatic clashes, but with the quiet erosion of support. One evening, while walking past the house on Ashcroft Drive, the very home she had once been denied, Vanessa paused at the curb. She didn't own that house, but it no longer mattered. She owned 4 others in the neighborhood, and more importantly, she owned her place there. Anthony joined her that night, parking his car beside hers. He got out, folded his arms, and looked at the house. "Funny, isn't it?" he said. "What is?" "You wanted this house." They said no, and now you've got the whole neighborhood listening to you. Vanessa exhaled, a smile tugging at her lips. Life's ironic that way. Sometimes the no is the push you need. They stood there in silence for a moment, both taking in how far she had come. The lesson wasn't about property or power, it was about refusing to accept someone else's definition of belonging. Vanessa had turned rejection into fuel, prejudice into persistence, and silence into a voice that couldn't be ignored. And as she walked back to her car, she thought about all the people watching her story unfold. Colleagues, neighbors, young women who once doubted their place in the world. She hoped they'd take this truth with them. Sometimes the walls people build aren't meant to keep you out, but to see how determined you are to break through. So, if you've ever been told you don't fit, remember this story. Remember Vanessa Coleman, who took rejection and turned it into leadership. Don't stop at the closed door. Knock again, push harder, or build your own way in. And if this story moved you, share it. Let others know what persistence can do. And make sure you hit subscribe, because stories like this, stories that show how strength and resilience can change everything, are only just beginning. The moral is simple. Exclusion may sting, but determination rewrites the end.